What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Mile High Misfits. In today's episode, I'm going to be showing you guys how to replace the valve cover and PCV valve in your 2016 to 2019 Chevy Malibu Hybrid, so stay tuned. So this is a 2016 Chevy Malibu Hybrid with the 1.8 liter Ecotec engine. This car has some rough idle issues, and there's also some hissing coming from under the valve cover, and if you take off your oil cap here, you can feel there's a lot of air being sucked in. On top of that, there's also a check engine light for P0171, which means bank 1 is too lean. And with this motor and these symptoms, 95% of the time, that means it's your PCV valve. And unfortunately, to replace the PCV valve in these cars, you can't just replace the PCV valve. They are built into the valve cover. You can't just replace this piece. So you have to buy the entire assembly here. So this is what it looks like. This right here is the part number that I got. I will leave a link to this in the description below, but this is what you're looking for. So let's start tearing it apart and I'll show you guys exactly how to replace it. So here's the tools that you're gonna need for this job. So you want a torque wrench, you want some 10mm sockets, you want one on a 1/4 inch ratchet, and a 3/8 ratchet. You want some assorted flathead screwdrivers for prying and that kind of stuff. I'm just using an adjustable wrench here for the fuel line, some needle nose pliers, some dikes, let's see, some dielectric grease. I got a pen. We got some Allen wrenches. I used the 3.5 here, and then this tiny little pry bar and a pick. Also a razor blade to clean the mating surface for your valve cover. And then I also have these hoses here. You'll see what I'm going to do with those later on when we're installing the seals on the injectors. And then I 3D printed these. These are basically just little cones that you use to resize Teflon seals for your injectors. You're going to need these for direct injection motors. Pretty much any injectors with basically direct injection cars need these. And again, I just 3D printed them just because they're kind of expensive and I rarely work on these kind of cars. So yeah, those are a little bit pricey to get those cones, I think. But so you might have to buy some of those if you don't have a printer. But yeah, anyways, those are the tools that you're going to need. All right, step 1 here is to take off your engine cover. This literally just pops right off. The next step is to disconnect the battery. So the battery is located in the trunk, not under the hood like in most cars. So it's actually located behind this little panel here. So you're just going to grab this, pull this out, and there's your battery right there. This is a 10mm right here. So I'm going to grab my 10mm socket and just undo this just like that and leave that to the side. So as far as getting things disconnected, the first thing that we're going to do is disconnect our coil wires here. And then we're also going to disconnect our coil packs themselves. These bolts are 10mm. So these harnesses can be a little bit confusing, but basically what you're going to want to do is you get your little screwdriver, you just pop this up. So this little tab comes up and then you just push it in like that. And it's basically going to push this little black piece backwards and you should be able to just slip it off just like that. And when you're pulling these out, make sure to label these so that way you put them back in the exact same cylinder that you took them out of. Usually I'll label them like right here or on the side or something. Just that way I make sure that I don't mix them up. So next I'm going to look around and see what all needs to be disconnected for me to lift out this assembly. So obviously there's going to be this wiring harness that was right here. You want to make sure that that is unclipped there. These little clips here on the side on this wiring harness. This one here. You're just going to want to make sure that everything is loose. We're obviously going to want to take off this funnel and put it onto the other one. All of your fuel rail wiring, we're going to want to take that off. And then this ground here as well. So I'm going to take all of that off real quick, and then we'll kind of go over what all I removed. This ground is another 10 millimeter. And when you remove a nut like this, I usually like to put it right back on to the spot that I took it off of, just that way I don't lose it, and I also remembered to put this back on. There's also a bracket on the side here that has a 10 millimeter bolt. This has the clips for this harness on it, so if you remove this, that'll get that harness out of the way. And then there's also another 10 millimeter for it down here. So just those two 10 millimeters should get this bracket out of the way. And there's also a bracket right here on the bottom as well. This one also is for that same harness. And I think that that is the only nut on this bracket. So now I'm also going to just pull off this funnel just to give me a little bit more visibility. So as you guys can see, I have pretty much all of the wiring out of the way and then all the brackets on the side here. So that way I can pull off the valve cover. The only thing left now is the fuel rail here, and then this line as well, and then the wiring for it all. So this is going to basically be the last step to remove the fuel rail and then the fuel injectors, pull that all out. And then pretty much from there, we can pull out all of the bolts for the valve cover, pull this out as one assembly, and then start putting things back together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to crack this loose and release the fuel pressure from the line here. I'm going to use a crescent wrench to do this. Make sure that you have a towel here so that way you can catch any of the fuel that comes out. There are better ways to do this, obviously. Probably the best way to do this is to pull the fuel pump fuse and let the motor crank over until it drains all the fuel out of the line. But I'm a moron and I forgot to do that before I started this, and it's too late now. So I'm just going to crack this open, let it soak up in this towel, and then we'll just do the same thing. It takes a little bit longer, it's a little bit messier, but it'll get the job done. So now that the fuel pressure is released, we can just slide that down there, and now this is disconnected. And then we can start undoing all of the 10 millimeter bolts that hold the fuel rail on, and then there are 4 10 millimeter bolts on the bottom here that hold your injectors in. Well, it turns out that the always amazing battery in my iPhone died while I was recording, but basically all I just did was I removed the bolts right here, and then the ones down in for the fuel injectors there. These are all just 10 millimeter bolts here that I removed for the fuel rail and for the injectors. So just remove those. You might need a magnet to get the ones for the injectors down there. And then I just used a 3/8 ratchet with an extension. Again, all 10 millimeter, they're all pretty easy to get. Okay, so as far as the fuel rail and the injectors, they are pretty much one unit, so you have to take out everything all at once. So what you're going to want to do is basically kind of shimmy each injector back and forth a little bit with like a screwdriver or something like that, because there's a Teflon seal on each one of the injectors that you want to kind of, I guess, wiggle loose. You really don't want to pull up a whole lot on this rail here. Obviously, you're going to have to a little bit to try and break it loose, but you don't want to damage these lines that run down there. You don't want to get any leaks or bend anything. So this is pretty much the most time-consuming part of this because it just takes a lot of patience. You don't want to damage this. This is going to cause a ton of issues if you jack it up. So just take your time, really work at these, and just wiggle each one as much as you possibly can. Try and wiggle it out and pull where you can. You might have to pry in some interesting ways to try and get them out. But yeah, just keep working at it, guys, and they'll come out eventually. So I put a little bit of PB Blaster in there just to kind of get these things a little bit more lubricated. I kind of wiggled it a little bit more. As you can see, I mean, it's a little bit more loose now. So hopefully that penetrating oil does a little bit of work on these things, and hopefully that'll help us to slide these out. But again, guys, this is just a pain in the ass. This is just part of it. So we'll keep working at it, and I'll keep you guys posted. Okay, well, the PB Blaster did some real magic. So as you guys can see, it is free now. And then I also disconnected the wiring right here. So this is all good to come out now. So we're just going to put this over on the bench over here. Don't want to get any fuel on the Corvette. All right, well, there you have it. So now we can start taking the valve cover off, and then we can put the new one on. Okay, so now things should start flying apart. So I'm going to take off the dipstick here. So this is a 10 millimeter. And then all of the rest of the bolts around the outside of your valve cover are going to be 10 millimeter. And then all of these inner ones are also 10 millimeter. You know, you can use a ratchet for this, and it's going to go a little bit slower. I'm just going to use an impact driver just to make this go a little bit quicker. Now that all the bolts are out, you'll want to give it just a little bit of prying on the edge. You don't want to go too crazy with it because you don't want to damage the aluminum mating surface underneath. So just kind of try and get underneath and just pry around the edges just a little bit. Now before installing anything, I always just like to check it over and make sure that we do in fact have the exact same part. Yes, I checked the bottom and everything's accounted for. Obviously the PCV system is the exact same. Everything looks like it's there. I switched over the funnel and the cap to the new one. And then the new one also has all of the hardware already on it. And then whatever it doesn't have, I switched over to the new one. So we're pretty much ready to go. All right, so to start the reassembly process, we're going to put new seals on our injectors here. So the first two seals are these two Teflon seals at the end here. For direct injection engines, you have these Teflon seals. They're more chemical resistant and they can withstand higher temperatures and pressures. So that's why you have those on these types of injectors. And then at the top here, you have your rubber O-ring. You also have this kind of like plastic ring here. This one we're not going to be replacing. I've seen some kits that have those. My kit did not come with it, so we're just going to be replacing the O-ring here. But this is the kit that I'm using. So this comes with your O-ring and two Teflon seals. And that is the part number there from GM. And this cost $26 just for this one little baggie of seals. So when you get 4 of them, it was $120 after taxes. So I already went ahead and installed these guys on this one. As you can see, these seals on the old ones are pretty much compressed all the way. They're not going to do a whole lot of sealing, but these ones, you can see stick out a little bit. So once we put them back into the cylinder hole, they're going to have a little bit to compress, and that's what will cause this to seal. So basically to install these, what I did is I ended up 3D printing kind of a cone. And so how you install these is you put the Teflon seal up at the top here, and then you slide it down, and this slowly stretches it out and widens the diameter of the seal. And once it does that, once it gets to the end, then you can slide it on to this, and then you get a pretty widened seal here. And once the ring is seated where it needs to be, then you usually have a tool that basically compresses this down and resizes the seal to the proper size. But what I've seen online is some people just use rubber hoses and hose clamps And basically you can put a rubber hose on the end of it, hose clamp it, and it will basically compress the seals back down to the correct size, or at least close enough that you can put them back in the cylinder hole. So that's what I'm doing, because I didn't want to spend, tons of money on a tool that I'm going to use once or twice. And then obviously I 3D printed this, so it cost me like, 10 cents to make. If you don't have a 3D printer, then, you might have to buy the little cones for this. I don't really know how much these cost, but I know that they're not super cheap. So I know that some people use like picks. I know that you might have like a tap or something that is the right diameter that you can use. So there's other tools out there that people use, but for me, this just made the most sense. So I'm going to show you guys real quick exactly how I do this, and we'll go from there. And I'll show you guys then once I'm done with one of them, then I'll show you how to reinstall them back into the cylinder head. Sometimes your O-ring will stay in the fuel rail, so make sure to pull that out. Now you want to grab your razor, and you're going to want to slice these old seals off, but you're going to want to be very careful not to damage the injector. So just go nice and slow, and just be careful not to cut yourself or anything like that. There's one. There's two. So now it's time to open up our new bag here, and we have our new seal. And this is way undersized, obviously, right now. So what we're going to want to do is put it on the tip of the cone here. And as you can see, it doesn't want to go down all the way. So you're going to have to kind of guide it down with your fingernails and slowly push it down and stretch it out. And you want to do this slowly. You don't want to, force it and snap it, because again, with a $25 bag of these, each one of these little Teflon pieces is 10 bucks. So you want to be careful. So just keep going. Take your time with it. And as you can see, it's slowly stretching out. So then once you get to the bottom here, there you go. And it should be good to put on to the injector now. So something else to keep in mind, it's very important that these seals go on dry. So you don't want to use any kind of lubricant when you're putting this on. So now you can put it onto the tip here. And just be very careful, because, these are pretty soft. You don't want to snap them or mar them up or anything like that. So if it just doesn't quite feel like it's going, you can put it back on the cone, try again. These Teflon rings are pretty forgiving. So if it starts to get like out of round and starts to get deformed, just put it back on the cone, kind of let it reset a little bit. These things, they can take a beating. So just keep working it. There you go. So you see now it's on the end there. And so you want to obviously go to the back one first. So we're just going to work this to the back of the injector. So it's going to snap into that one, into the first spot, but we want to keep going. All right, there you go. So now we've got the seal on the second ring, or I guess the second slot on the shaft here. And you can see this ring is pretty loosey-goosey on here. It's pretty stretched out. So what we're going to do is now we're going to put our first hose over the top of this. We want it to be a little bit big, so that way we can pass it over without pushing the seal off of the shaft, right? We want to make sure that it fits over both. And then we're going to tighten down this hose clamp, and then that should give us a pretty good starting point with our seal. So that way it's resized slightly, and then we can go down a size on our hose. So there you go. Just leave it on there for, I don't know, 30 seconds to 60 seconds, something like that. Just kind of let it start to shrink up a little bit, and then we can take this off and put on the other hose. You can already see here how much it's snugged up. So now we're going to put on this hose, which is pretty much the exact diameter of the injector here. So we're just going to slide it on in there. Tighten this up, and this should get us the rest of the way that we need. All right, there we go. That looks much tighter on there now. That is a much better fit. So now that this is resized, we're going to do the exact same thing with the front one as well. So 2 Teflon seals go on each injector. So I'm going to do the exact same thing with this front one, and then the 2 on injector number 2, and then the same front 2 on injector number 1. And then we should be good to go to reinstall these into the head. And then once you have your second seal on, don't forget your O-ring. And once you're done installing your seals, this is what you're going to have. So you got 2 new Teflon seals per injector, and then we also have a new rubber O-ring at the top. So at this point, now we can reinstall these into the head. So I'm going to show you guys exactly how to do that. To install the injectors, originally I thought that you could just install the injectors first and then install the fuel rail afterwards. That's not actually the case. The best way to do this is to actually install the injectors into the fuel rail again, and then install all of this together as one unit. So basically what I'm going to do is use some of this dielectric grease to lube up this O-ring here at the top. We're going to pop it back into the fuel rail after we kind of clean out this orifice here, and then we're going to torque down our hex bolts again, get these all snugged up, and then obviously hook up our wiring. And then after that, we're going to reinstall our valve cover and then torque down our fuel rail. So first I'm just going to clean all these out with a Q-tip. Just make sure that there's no gunk or anything like that in there. We don't want any of these debris clogging up our injectors. And then after that, I'm just going to get a little bit of this grease here and just get a really light film on our O-ring, just so that way we don't have like any tearing or anything like that. Just because these are pretty prone to ripping and pinching and that kind of stuff. We just don't want anything like that happening while these are getting popped into place. And then we're just going to do that exact same thing with the other 3 injectors. All right, there we go. Those are all put back together. So now let's put the valve cover back on the car and start reassembly. Now always make sure to clean your mating surfaces. You don't want any dirt or oil on here that can cause a leak when you put your valve cover back on, and that will mess with your valve cover gasket. You might want to use like a razor or something like that to clean up any dirt or anything like that if it's built up on here. But just make sure not to scratch the surface here, because you don't want to leave any gashes or anything like that in it. And at these corners on the gasket, I do like to use just a small amount of RTV just in case. These are points that are known to leak on pretty much any car. So with your timing cover here, that's going to be a spot where most cars tend to leak. So right at these 2 points on the edges here, I like to just put a little bit just to help prevent any leaks. All right, now we can install our valve cover. So we're just going to slide this guy in here. There we go. And then start your bolts by hand. Okay, and as far as the torque sequence and spec, I've heard that it's anywhere from 70 inch-pounds to 86 inch-pounds. I'm probably going to go towards 86 inch-pounds. That sounds a little bit more right to me. So we'll go with that. And then you want to work from the middle here, kind of work in the middle and crisscross, work your way outward. And then you'll want to basically crisscross from like the middle here, and then work your way out basically, and then kind of finish up with these ones on the edges. So make sure that you do that. You don't want to just go around in a circle because your gasket won't seat properly. So you kind of just want to crisscross everything. It's not super important that you follow the exact procedure and pattern, just as long as you spread it out, just so that way the gasket seats fully. All right, so now that it's time to install our injectors, what we want to do is we want to get our spacers and we want to get our bolts, and we want to put these in first. So we're going to put our bolt through, and then we're going to put our spacer on. And basically what we're going to do is just kind of set it in there just like that, because trying to get these in afterwards is going to be a huge pain. So that's why they kind of give you those little rubber stoppers that are in there, so that way those hold in place. It makes the installation much easier. Make sure not to drop those in the oil hole. That was kind of stupid of me. But basically I took the funnel and the oil cap off just so that way we got a little bit more room. But basically we're going to guide this down. There's a bolt here. I also took that off. But basically you're going to do the exact same thing with the bolts and the spacers here as well. So now just put your bolts in and start all of our bolts. And we want to give a little bit of pressure and kind of start working the injectors down. And they should start kind of seating, but we're going to use the bolts to bring in the injectors the rest of the way. So the torque spec on these is 44 inch-pounds, but my torque wrench doesn't go down that low. So I'm just going to torque these up. Just make sure to not go too tight because, again, these are going into aluminum. You don't want to go too tight. So I'm just going to snug them up just a little bit, and they should be good. So now we can reinstall this little bolt here that goes to our main fuel line. And we can tighten down the rest of our fuel rail bolts. Now these are going into aluminum, so you don't want to tighten them too tight. And then we can reinstall our dipstick. Now reinstall our fuel line here. Now we're going to put a little bit of this dielectric grease on our coil boots, just so that way they slide on a little bit easier. There we go. And again, make sure that these remain in the same order that you took them out. And there you go. That's about it. So yeah, just make sure you get all of your wiring back together, get your clips. It's just the exact same process in reverse for all the wiring. Don't forget your ground right here. Let's see, and then obviously your coil wiring. I usually like to leave the top cover off, just that way if there's any fuel leaks or anything weird going on, you can see it quickly before anything turns bad. So let's fire it up and see how it runs. Now we'll just reconnect the battery here and tighten that down. So then just place the cover back onto the motor and you're good to go. But there you have it, guys. That's how to replace the PCV system in your 2016 to 2019 Chevy Malibu Hybrid with the 1.8 liter engine. If you guys have any questions, leave them in the comments below and I'll try and answer them for you. But if you enjoyed the content for today, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for future content. I'll catch you guys next week. Later.